Hello, everybody. My name is Beth Bagwell, and I'm the Executive Director of the International Town and Gown Association. I'd like to thank you for joining us today for the updated CollegeAIM Intervention Matrix, CollegeAIM, What Colleges and Communities Need to Know Now. This webinar is in partnership with the National Institute on Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism, the International Town and Gown Association, and the Association of College and University Housing Officers. In case you're not familiar with ITGA, we are a nonprofit organization that provides resources and professional development opportunities for addressing the common challenges, emerging issues, and opportunities between institutions of higher ed and the communities that host them. I'd like to introduce you to Mary DeNaro, Executive Director of ACUOI, for a few opening remarks.
Hi, Beth, and welcome everybody. Happy Monday to this webinar that is a partnership. For those of you who are familiar with ACUOI, you know that we regularly reach out to other associations to find ways to bring expertise to our members. We think that today's session is a wonderful combination between two very important partners. Alcoholism, alcohol abuse, alcohol intervention are things that are top of mind for our 17,000 members around the world. While this doesn't always necessarily happen in residence halls, many times it is the campus professional, the housing professional, who is left to deal with the aftermath and the impact that this can bring. We're delighted to bring these experts to you today, and we hope that if you have any questions or if you would like to hear more about what our panelists have to say, that you let us know, and we'll be happy to get that information back to you or provide it on our online community, in the talking stick, or through other vehicles. So with that, I'd like to turn it back to Beth.
Thank you so much, Mary, and thank you for partnering with us today. Now I'm going to turn this over to Deborah Langer, Public Affairs Outreach Specialist at NIAAA. Deborah, can you get us started, please?
Sure. Thank you, Beth. And on behalf of NIAAA, thank you all for joining us for today's webinar. As some of you may remember, NIAAA has maintained a robust college drinking research portfolio for many decades. Back in 2002, our College Drinking Task Force, which was comprised of college presidents and researchers, released a comprehensive report, which is actually still available, called A Call to Action, Changing the Culture of Drinking at U.S. Colleges. This report included a very simple chart that grouped common alcohol interventions into different categories of effectiveness based on peer-reviewed literature. And looking back, this was in fact the precursor for what we are now calling CollegeAIM. In subsequent years, we created a quote, College Presidents Working Group, whose members asked if we could create a more robust product, one that would also analyze costs associated with the interventions along with levels of effectiveness. At that point, we knew we were onto something, and we reached out to 6 of the most respectful and distinguished researchers in the field to serve as developers of this new product. We also asked an additional 10 experts to serve as reviewers. CollegeAIM, or the College Alcohol Intervention Matrix, was released in late 2015 after a multi-year development effort. CollegeAIM was and remains an easy-to-use comprehensive tool that can help schools address harmful and underage drinking by directing them to effective, evidence-based intervention strategies. As requested by the presidents in our working group, it evaluated common interventions according to the levels of effectiveness, costs, and other factors. The original CollegeAIM was distinctive because of its breadth of its research and analysis and the expertise of its contributors and its user-friendly format, including an extensive review of decades of scientific literature, ratings for nearly 60 interventions, and the inclusion of 2 user-friendly matrices and other resources. And a final point, and the reason we're here today, as valuable as CollegeAIM was, we knew that to remain relevant, it needed to be updated periodically to ensure that it always captures the most recent research and features the most current ratings and analysis. So 2 years ago, we embarked on an ambitious update project, and we're fortunate to line up the same 6 original developers to oversee this important revision. As a result, and the results were impressive, as expected. The revised CollegeAIM now includes peer-reviewed literature through 2017, and adds 7 new interventions to the original 60 and features updated ratings for 5 existing interventions. With this important update, CollegeAIM remains as relevant and useful as ever, and we're excited to review it in today's webinar. I will now turn it over to Dr. Kilmer, who's one of the notable 6 developers, but first I'd like to extend my deepest gratitude to ITGA and all of today's speakers. CollegeAIM is a very valuable product, but it is only useful if college administrators know about it and are comfortable using it. Today's discussion and others like it will help to spread the word. Thanks again for joining us, and please share what we have discussed today with your colleagues. Thank you so much.
Deb, thank you. I'm going to briefly introduce myself, and then I'll tag over to Jess and Alicia to introduce themselves as well. I'm Jason Kilmer. I'm an associate professor in psychiatry and behavioral sciences at the University of Washington in Seattle, and I was honored to be one of the 6 you heard referenced. Tobin Nelson, who's at the University of Minnesota, we always argue who was in 6th place. I'm confident I was in 6th place, but I look forward to working with everyone today. I'll tag over to Jessica to say hi.
Hi, I'm Jessica Krantz. I'm an associate professor at the University of Oregon and was also privileged to be one of the 6 original developers working alongside Jason on the individual focus team. And I'm very excited to be presenting to all of you today.
All right, and then I'll finish up here. So my name is Alicia Baker. I am an alcohol and other drugs specialist for the University of Florida. So I'll be speaking more from the practitioner side of the house, as well as my past role as an assistant director in health promotion.
Awesome, thank you. We all know that this is the slowest time of the year for anyone working in Res Life or Housing and Food Services. So that is not true. Thank you for making time for this today. The truth is, this is very, very important because we know that alcohol plays an impact on academic outcomes, on mental health, particularly if your RAs or other staff play a part in enforcement of policy. We know that can be important as well. We tried to set this up as kind of a 3-headed approach where I will talk a bit about CollegeAIM, what it is, how to use it. Dr. Krantz will talk about what's new in the update that came out in late 2019. Remember late 2019. And then Alicia is going to talk about how schools use this, especially through the lens of someone that's worked so closely as a part of Res Life and what that would mean for ACUHO-I. I just want to say that we just hit 17 months virtual. We're still not able to go back to the office. I've been on 12 virtual platforms so far. And I didn't know there were 12 virtual platforms, but I really believe that Zoom gets me. I got an email from Beth this morning where Beth actually sent the link. And when I look closely at the link actually said, which is how I feel all the time. So I really just want to thank Zoom for getting me. I think that's really important. We want to thank some other folks too. I'll go back and just acknowledge the role that Beth, Susan Stafford, and their team at ITGA has played, Deb Langer, Fred Donadeo, and the team at NIAAA, Mary Spencer, and all the ACUHO-I folks. And honestly, again, thanks for all of you for making time for this today. So what was the hope of CollegeAIM? A lot of schools will say, hey, let's do this alcohol prevention thing. It's super visible, but it may not be very effective. Or, yikes, this thing's super expensive. How helpful is it? It might be really helpful. It might not be so helpful. The goal was, how can we increase the likelihood that research informs what campuses do? The research informs the interventions to address drinking on campuses by letting schools pick evidence-based strategies as a function of their relative cost and relative effectiveness. You heard Deb reference the teams, and it really was remarkable that we were able to get the same 6 players, not only for the original CollegeAIM, but for the revisited update. When this first was done, Dr. Mary Larimer at the University of Washington oversaw the individual strategies team with Jessica and with me. The University of Minnesota oversaw environmental strategies with Tracy Toomey, Tobin Nelson, and Kathleen Link. By the time we started working on the 2nd edition, Jessica moved to the University of Oregon in Eugene, and with what was very, very clear was an impressive mastery of the scientific literature, overtook the role as kind of lead on the individual strategies side. I always point out, because Jessica is such a good friend of mine, that looking at the affiliations also kind of captures my emotions during her transition. Because when she first said she was leaving, I was like, wow. And when she left, I was like, oh, which it really does sum it up very well. And that, thanks, graphics. So the development process. Phase one was, let's find out what's out there. What are campuses doing, using, what's in the published literature, what dimensions are we going to rate these approaches on? Phase two was game time in the research literature. Find the articles, read them, rate things, and rate. At the first one, it was almost 60. By the time we did the update, it was over 60 interventions on multiple dimensions. This is a lot on this slide. It's not meant to be completely digestible. It's mainly just to show you a lot was rated. We took very seriously trying to make it as user-friendly as possible, but not oversimplify the science. So it was relative effectiveness, the amount and quality of the research that was out there, relative costs, potential barriers, staffing expertise, the strategy level, public health reach, targeted or research population. And then on our side, the individual side, we looked at if it had short or long-term effects of the approach, and then the primary modality for its delivery. Phase three, I can say with confidence, there's no peer review process that's gone through what we did, honestly. If you submit an article for publication in a research journal, maybe, likely to maybe 3 peer reviewers. The 6 of us sent over what we had. 10 college alcohol researchers, unknown to us, provided all their feedback, sent it back over, tag, back and forth, until literally all 16 said, we got it. There's a consensus. We agree with where everything is. We agree with what's been said. So through multiple rounds of review and revision, the consensus process took decades of research and made it the tool you're about to learn about right now. The strategies, there's a lot. And this is the whoa part of the slide. But it looked at campus only, community only, campus or community, education or awareness programs, cognitive behavioral skills-based programs, motivational or feedback-based, and interventions that were delivered by healthcare providers. Those last 2 are kind of their own thing, and you'll see where they belong on CollegeAIM. I'm going to pause for a minute just to say, because I didn't at the beginning, if you have questions as we go, please feel free to use the chat, especially when the others present. I'll do all I can to moderate the chat, and just do let us know if there are questions or comments. So the idea was that campuses could review the strategies that are out there, look at what they're already doing on campus. If what they're doing works, awesome. If what they're doing has gaps, that's okay. What evidence-based options can replace those gaps? If what a campus is doing are approaches with less effectiveness or maybe even no effectiveness, are there ways to get replacements? And the idea is you don't need to be someone with a alcohol and other drug background, that anyone reviewing CollegeAIM can use the worksheet to look at a combination of approaches based on needs and budget. So the idea was assess behavior on campus and set priorities. We can all agree the last year was not normal, but if you've collected data on the last year, that's going to be really important to get a sense of what your trends on your campus are, what your needs are. If you haven't collected data for a while, do collect data, not just about behavior from students, but take a look at your data from conduct. What types of enforcement data are you seeing? Notes and records from police, that's part of your data collection as well. Select strategies after figuring out what's out there, then plan how to carry out strategies and measure results before finally implementing the chosen strategies, evaluating them, and refining programs if needed. So you start with a compilation of what's already out there. You go to CollegeAIM. You saw the website from Deb earlier, collegedrinkingprevention.gov/CollegeAIM, and you click on worksheet. Look at those special effects I brought in for this. Once you click on worksheet, it pulls up the worksheet. What's the top? It's what you're currently doing. This should not just be filled out by one person. Bring multiple stakeholders together. You may be doing stuff that people didn't know you were doing. It might be that there are multiple efforts all with the same intent and you're duplicating efforts. It might be that one branch on campus is doing something that's been proven to not be very effective and could be counter to some of what you're doing. So get a group of people to decide what are we doing? And how are we doing it? Do we have something that's on CollegeAIM as evidence-based, but not a lot of people are getting to it? If you have a really great program for mandated students, but you don't have consistent enforcement of policy, people aren't going to reliably be getting to that mandated intervention. After you get a sense of what we're doing, is it effective or not? What are our observations? You move to the bottom part. What are possible new strategies that are more budget sensitive, that are more effective, that are addressing gaps, that make sense in our whole array of what we're offering on campus? And then go shopping. See what's on CollegeAIM that you want to add to what you're doing. There are two matrices. There's individually focused strategies and environmentally focused. You can download a PDF of the entire CollegeAIM booklet. You can order booklets for you and your team, or you can play with the HTML version, the website version. I'm going to show you, this is the PDF style. So individual, environmental. These are in columns of relative cost. These are in rows of relative effectiveness. The intent is not for you to read the slide. I just wanted you to see the big picture. So going along the rows of relative effectiveness, we have higher effectiveness, moderate effectiveness, lower effective, what's just not effective, and then what had too few studies to even weigh in. In gray, these are the interventions delivered by healthcare professionals that are already deemed effective, yet if you're at a campus that doesn't have a health center, for example, it may be more challenging to implement. The columns are of relative cost. If you go to the web-based version, this is a vibrant, very useful tool. If someone says, I'm not really a researcher, I don't have access to a lot of articles, but I want to see them, this is here for you. So if you go to CollegeAIM, you can select a strategy, see ratings, references, and potential resources. So say I want to look at age 21 drinking age, I can pull it up and it'll have summary, notes, references, and potential resources. If I click on references, it brings me to the articles. Anything that's hyperlinked in blue, you can actually get to the article itself. The other articles, if they're not hyperlinked, it's because they're not yet in the public domain. So any articles that can be shared ethically and appropriately, they're allowed to be shared. If you want to combine more than one strategy, you simply click. I click normative re-education. I click personalized feedback intervention generic. Then you click print preview strategies. You can either save as a PDF or actually print it out as a tool you can bring to meetings and things like that. So what it'll give you is a printout of all of it. It'll give you the description of what it is, a summary of the ratings. It'll give you all the references. So if it's something with a ton of references, you're going to be printing a lot. But it gives you all of it right there to be able to discuss. I think a hidden treasure, which sounds kind of nerdy to say, but it's true, is the frequently asked questions, the FAQs. If you click on FAQs, they're in categories of about monitoring campus alcohol problems, selecting and implementing strategies, responding to potential objections or challenges, and then just CollegeAIM itself and the ongoing research. So, if you're super motivated to bring things to campus, you're getting some pushback. There's advice, there are tips about how to address things like that. And I think in the actual booklet, probably the most important sentence is that it says, consider a mix of strategies. Every time a campus says, hey, we're doing this evidence-based approach, my first reaction is awesome. My second reaction is, what else are you doing? Because it really does take a mix of strategies. If all you're doing is environmental stuff, we're missing some of the high-risk things with individuals. If you're doing individual, but not environmental, you may not have the things in place to support the individual part. Quoting verbatim from CollegeAIM, your best chance for creating a safer campus could come from a combination of individual and environmental interventions that work together to maximize positive effects. When you look at the role of ITGA, town gown associations, why ITGA is so important to this is that a lot of the community coalitions, the community folks that want to work with campuses are essential to our success on campus. I literally did a picture of the booklet. Some of the most effective strategies are carried out in the communities and states surrounding the campuses, such as enforcing the minimum legal drinking age. Campus leaders can be influential in bringing about off-campus environmental change that protects students. Yet look at the next part. To achieve success off campus, partner with leaders and coalitions in your community and state. In my school, some of our residence halls are maybe a block from bars and stores that sell alcohol. If those bars don't do a great job of checking IDs, or if we're hearing that they too routinely, cut corners with selling to minors, I mean, we can work on and off campus to make sure that what we're doing on campus is supported off campus and vice versa. So with that, my last slide, so far what we've heard from folks, they love the direct access to articles. People will make clear that worksheet has prompted conversations that previously weren't happening. It brought stakeholders together on and off campus to talk about what are we doing well, less well, where might there be gaps. People love the FAQ page. I think that the HTML one really is vibrant. That said, don't sleep on the PDF version or the form you can actually order. Get that hard copy. I have a friend that's made clear, bring the hard copy to every meeting. And I think that's important. We can all agree the last 17 months have not been glorious for numerous reasons, not the least of which are from budget standpoints. So it's helpful for prioritizing in a tough budget climate. If you're doing things that are pretty expensive and not horribly effective, what can you do that's more less expensive but more effective? And we've also heard people say, hey, where's the CollegeAIM for cannabis? Or where's the CollegeAIM for sexual assault prevention? People have found this so useful. They wish there was a similar model for prioritizing prevention in these other domains as well. That was a lot. We'll have time for Q&A at the end. But with that, I'm going to tag over to my friend and colleague, Dr. Krantz, who's going to talk about what's new, what's different, and what's coming with CollegeAIM. Jess, I'll tag over to you.
Thanks, Jason. Thank you for that excellent foundation, which will help contextualize what I'm going to present on, which is really to highlight, as Jason was just saying, what is new in CollegeAIM from 2015 to 2019, and what's changed between those two versions. So if you were familiar with the 2015 version, but haven't had a chance to check out the 2019 version yet, this is a preview of the differences that you're going to find. I'm also going to touch base a little bit as we remain uncertain, especially with the recent surge in transmission of the Delta variant, kind of what our fall is going to look like and what precautions might be on the horizon for us. I'm going to review briefly which of those interventions covered in CollegeAIM can be delivered remotely and have shown efficacy in doing so. So if you wouldn't mind going to the first slide. Thanks, Jace. So I know that Jason provided a wonderful overview of all of the different dimensions that we provided ratings on. And again, he highlighted that the two primary dimensions that form the basis of the two different matrices are effectiveness and relative costs. So again, rows of effectiveness and columns of cost. And so I want to call attention to how the two teams, the environmental focused strategies team and the individual focused strategies team, sort of operationalized or defined those different dimensions. So in terms of effectiveness on the environmental side, they did so in a relative way. So based on their holistic judgment of the literature, and on the individual focus side, we had cutoffs for percentage of studies. So if 75% or more of studies showed a positive impact, that is to reduce alcohol use, reduce alcohol consequences, or to prevent the increase in alcohol use or prevent the increase in alcohol consequences relative to a control group, then that was said to have higher effectiveness. And then you can see the ranges for moderate effectiveness, lower effectiveness, and then if less than 25% of studies showed a positive effect, then we said those were just not effective. In terms of relative cost, both the environmental and the individual team had to make relative ratings of higher versus mid-range versus lower cost, because the individual cost of implementing programs on each campus is so highly dependent on what staffing is already in place, how staffing can be redeployed to implement different programs, as well as sometimes with commercial programs, the negotiation of individual costs to license and use a particular commercial program. So those are all relative. And then barriers and amount and quality of research also differed a little bit in our ratings. With the amount and quality of research, I just want to call attention to, there were just far more studies of individual focused strategies. And so we put a higher threshold on 4 stars for us meant 11 or more studies meant higher research versus 5 or more longitudinal studies for the environmental side. You can go to the next slide. So first, I want to talk about environmental focus strategies. And here you can see I've taken a snapshot of the PDF version of CollegeAIM, and I've highlighted in green the 3 strategies that I'm going to talk about, so you can just kind of visually see where those appear in the 2019 version of the matrix. So there were 3 new environmental strategies that were added to the 2019 version that weren't there in the 2015 version. So establishing minimum unit pricing, and that was in the higher effectiveness row, and all of these were in the mid-range cost column. Conducting reward and reminder or mystery shopping visits, that was moderate effectiveness, and also in the moderate effectiveness row was enacting false or fake ID laws. Next slide. There were 2 strategies highlighted here in yellow that actually moved. So they were in a different position in the 2015 version of the matrix and have moved in the 2019 version. So one strategy moved to a higher level of effectiveness. So it used to be lower effectiveness and then got bumped up to moderate effectiveness, and that's restricting alcohol sponsorship and advertising. However, one other strategy moved to a lower level of effectiveness based on new research. So that had been in the higher effectiveness range and now is in the moderate effectiveness range. And that's retaining a ban on Sunday sales where that was applicable. So municipalities and counties where alcohol sales on Sunday were restricted, the evidence for retaining that ban is less. I think that's because fewer and fewer cities and counties actually have those bans. Next slide. So thinking about the individual focus strategy side, again, I've used green to highlight on the PDF where you would find these visually. There were 4 new strategies added from 2015 to 2019. One of those is decisional balance exercises alone, and that was in the moderate effectiveness, lower cost range, and that's basically weighing the pros and cons of continuing to drink in the way that a student is drinking or making a change in their behavior. Also in that lower cost, moderate effectiveness part of the matrix was protective behavioral strategies alone. And those were interventions that focused on helping students to increase the number of strategies they could use to reduce harms from drinking, either strategies they employ before a drinking occasion or during a drinking occasion, or sometimes what we refer to as serious harm reduction. So strategies to prevent the most harmful outcomes from alcohol use. And then in the mid-range cost moderate effectiveness box was one commercial program that got added, which was Alcohol Wise. And I do think that it's important to note that Alcohol Wise actually subsumes another commercially named program that was in the CollegeAIM, which is eCheckup to Go. So Alcohol Wise takes the feedback from eCheckup to Go and embeds that within a larger context of alcohol education. So it is a little hard to separate out that, but you can also find eCheckup to Go in the matrix as a separate rating. And then the last one to add, and this is in the too few studies to rate box, because there were only, I believe, 2 studies at the time that we completed our review, was the Drinking Assessment and Feedback Tool for College Students, or the Draft CS. So hopefully by the next update to CollegeAIM, there will be more research on this approach and we can comment on its effectiveness. But it's a feedback-based intervention. Next slide. We did find one strategy that moved to a higher level of effectiveness, and that was in-person norms clarification alone. So that went from lower effectiveness to moderate effectiveness. And I do want to set apart that in-person norms clarification is not the same as personalized normative feedback. Personalized normative feedback tends to be delivered in an electronic format, or, on a computer or over the web. Sometimes it's been mailed, whereas in person, as the name implies, norms clarification usually is a group meeting or an intervention that happens in a classroom setting. So those are different. And then there were two strategies that previously had too few studies to rate that actually had more research on them that had come out from the 2015 version to when we called it on the 2019 version when we made our cutoff. And that was Alcohol 101 Plus, which is in the lower effectiveness band. That's a commercial program. And then blood alcohol concentration feedback alone. And I want to make very clear, that was found not effective. So there was sufficient research for us to conclude that this is actually not a good use of time and resources. And blood alcohol concentration feedback alone typically looks like someone going to a party or going to a dorm and taking people's breath alcohol readings before they leave and then toward the end. And anecdotally, what I'll tell you from colleagues is students would turn it into a game to see who could get the highest BAC. So as I mentioned, I would talk about a few options for efficacious prevention that doesn't involve face-to-face interaction if your school goes back to a situation where you're not able to provide face-to-face interventions or meetings with students. So all of these, I will say upfront, are only in that higher effectiveness band of individual strategies. So I'm not talking about environmental strategies, and I'm not talking about moderate or lower effectiveness strategies on the individual side, but just higher effectiveness individual strategies. In the lower cost range is self-monitoring and assessment alone. So we know simply becoming more aware of your behavior through the process of recording what you've done tends to decrease that behavior, which is why in research we have comparison groups so we can measure the effect of assessment alone. Does the intervention above and beyond that have an impact? But self-monitoring is very cheap to implement and can have a positive effect. Goal and intention setting alone interventions are also in this grouping, but the reason I have a question mark is they're a little harder to describe. The ones that we have described in the CollegeAIM are all very different. So I would actually encourage you to go and look at the research articles themselves. There aren't a ton of them there to read about the different options that are available and what impact it had on which alcohol outcomes. So did it decrease use? Did it decrease consequences? What's most important to you in your local context? And as I mentioned, eCheckup to Go is a commercial program that's separately named in CollegeAIM, and that eCheckup to Go is an example of personalized feedback interventions, or PFIs. And what I have here on the screen is graphic of a PFI that was implemented by my colleague Mary Larimer and others at the University of Washington. And you can develop your own PFI. And again, if you go and look at the research articles, it'll describe what information is typically contained in those. But eCheckup to Go is a commercial version of that program. And both generic PFIs that colleges might have implemented on their own and eCheckup to Go are separately rated in CollegeAIM. Now, oops, if you could go back, Jace. Thank you. One part of a personalized feedback intervention is personalized normative feedback, which I juxtaposed for you before with in-person norms clarification. That personalized normative feedback piece, which is blown up here on the screen, is also a separate lower cost, higher effectiveness strategy. So implementing the norms piece alone and challenging students' misperception that more students are drinking or that students are typically drinking more than they do has been shown to reduce alcohol use and consequences. In the mid-range cost strategies are a group approach and an individual approach. The group approach is the alcohol skills training program. And then the individual approach are brief motivational interventions, of which the brief alcohol screening and intervention for college students is the prototype on which most BMIs have been patterned. So if you're already implementing basics, you are implementing a BMI. And both of those can be implemented over Zoom. I know many campuses that have done it, and we actually have some specific scientific evidence that Jason and I and our colleague Christine Lee at UW were involved in with community colleges implementing a BMI over a web conferencing platform and found it to be effective. And my last slide is the higher cost strategies. Alcohol EDU for first year students, sometimes referred to Alcohol EDU for college, is in this bucket. And I don't have a picture because it's a commercial program and I don't own those graphics, but that may be a strategy that you're already implementing on your college or one that you've thought about looking into. But all of the ones that I named can be delivered remotely and do have some evidence to support their efficacy in being delivered remotely as we continue to figure out our present moment and what we're doing and how we help students best. And with that, I will turn it over to Alicia.
All right, if we could, there we go, perfect. Okay, so I'm going to talk more about, we can see the correct slides, okay? Okay, we're good, perfect. So we're going to talk really from the practitioner side of CollegeAIM. Not only, you as practitioners for folks working in housing, but also giving you a kind of a behind the scenes look is how some of your health and wellness professionals on your campus look at this work. So CollegeAIM is really rooted in prevention strategies, health promotion offices, health education offices, health and wellness. Those are some of the common monikers. We focus in prevention. So how do we engage students in preventing these high-risk behaviors? Or if they're starting to dabble in them, how can we prevent it from getting worse? So these first few slides are going to be really a cheat sheet to health behavior theory and health promotion language. So won't be talking about chickering today, no student development theory. I'm not as well versed in that, so my apologies. But the first thing I'll talk about is the levels of prevention. So primary, secondary, and tertiary. A lot of your colleagues in health education do a lot regarding primary and secondary work. So really preventing things from getting worse or preventing things from happening at all. Another common thing you'll hear folks talk about is the Institutes of Medicine protractor. So CollegeAIM interventions really focus in that prevention level of it. So either working with entire student populations, targeted subpopulations, or targeted individuals. And in this context, it would be the folks living in your residence halls. And I would say not even your residents, but also your resident assistants, maybe even your graduate hall directors, because they're students too. And some of these behaviors may even show up in their performance that could impact their work. A couple other common frameworks that you see folks using in health promotion is the sociological model. So this is really looking at how all of the different aspects of a person's individual, interpersonal, community, even policy level interactions impact the decisions they make around their health behavior. With substance use in particular, there's also what's called the strategic prevention framework. So there's these different aspects of how people decide on interventions, assess, implement, and make these interventions sustainable. And CollegeAIM fits really nicely into all of these. First, with the sociological model, as Jason has mentioned, as Jessica has mentioned, and I will mention just to really drive the point home, it is really the most effective when you combine individual and environmental policy levels. So when all of the levels of the sociological model are addressed, that's when you're going to make the most impact and behavior change. And this also tends to give us more justification as student affairs professionals to work outside of the individual level with our students. This gives us as student affairs professionals justifying the advocacy, the practitioner time, advocating for changes in university policy, for community policy, for working with our off-campus partners and making these changes. With that, the strategic prevention framework, once you're kind of going into the, all right, let's work on some interventions here, this really helps us do this in a way that's going to help us pick the most effective, but also the things that are going to resonate the most with our student population. So looking at the data, Jason mentioned earlier, the data collection, I would say for you all in student affairs, if your health promotion office uses the National College Health Assessment, that's a pretty common health behavior survey that has substance use data within it. Your schools also might be using what's called the core survey that's focused solely on alcohol and drug use, or even the monitoring the future. Monitoring the future is a pretty large data set. Another one that may be of interest for data collection or just to get an idea of it, if you're all going through the JED campus process, the Healthy Mind Study or the Healthy Mind Survey, that's another data set you can look at. So talk to your health promotion folks, talk to your counseling folks. They may have that data on hand for you if you don't have access to it. So from there, just looking at the capacity, so the people that can help with these interventions, which could be you potentially if you're interested, planning, implementing, and evaluating these things. One love language of health promotion folks is biennial review. So you may have folks in health promotion, especially substance use work. There is what's called the Drug-Free Schools and Campuses Act. So what that essentially is, it's through the Department of Education. It is a federal regulation that most universities, well, any university receiving federal funding, we are obligated to provide substance use prevention programming. So for those of you that work at larger universities, you may have a dedicated alcohol and other drug professional on staff. But for smaller universities, it might be a health education person, or it might be a dedicated counseling center position. But in some way, shape, or form, universities are required to provide substance use prevention on their campuses. So for us, we have to do what's called a biennial review. So every couple of years, we have to write a gigantic report looking at the alcohol and other drug interventions, but also how effective they are. So there really is an emphasis of not only are we doing the work, but we're doing work that is effective and makes an impact on our students' health behaviors. So for us, it's really having not only the prevention professional doing this, but best practice with CollegeAIM, with most coalition and committee work, we do this as a team. So ideally, your professional overseeing this, they're not doing this by themselves. So if this is a passion area for you, or you want to learn more about substance use prevention, this would be a wonderful opportunity to collaborate with them and say, hey, I just sat in on this webinar about CollegeAIM. Are you using this? How are you using this? Let's talk about this. How can I help you? So like I already kind of mentioned here, so the tips on using CollegeAIM, especially for folks that aren't the health and wellness department. So for those of you in housing, how can you connect with your health and wellness departments? How do you talk to your student healthcare center, your counseling center, health promotion, getting in touch with them and seeing what they're doing and how you can support the work that they're doing to make your lives and your residents' lives a little easier regarding alcohol use in the residence halls. Getting involved with substance use committees on campus. Most universities have some way, shape, or form, a committee or a coalition, or even out in the community. There's substance use coalitions out in the community that you could also be a part of if you need volunteer work or want to volunteer in your off time. As it was stated before, again, having a mix of individual and environmental strategies. You're probably saying, but I work in a residence hall, like how much environmental work can I do? One I can think of off the top of my head from the time that I worked in housing a long time ago. I was a hall director. Preventing marketing and the promotional materials from your bars from getting into the residence hall. So making sure there's no advertisements in those common spaces. Or if you have a student that's working for a bar and they're trying to do door-to-door solicitation, most residence halls have a solicitation policy. So making sure that those things don't happen, or the flyers under the doors. And then of course, again, reiterating what folks have already said, use the website. If you're curious about something, if you have a question about an alcohol intervention, CollegeAIM is a great place for the citations, for the interventions, and the resources around that. But you're probably wondering, how can you use it practically as a housing professional? First and foremost, debunking the everybody drinks in college mindset. I was in an interview for a conduct position last week, and the candidate said, well, everybody drinks in college. So we still have professionals with this mindset that this is an expectation. We have to move away from that. We have the data that shows that not every student drinks, and a lot of our students come to college not drinking. They've been abstainers up until they come into higher education. So how can we correct those normative misperceptions with our residents and even with our RAs, that they may be the ones perpetuating alcohol use? For some of you, if you have RAs that like to go drinking with their residents, and you have to constantly correct that. That can be a conversation point around that. Alcohol skills training program. Jessica mentioned it in her slides. That could be one way that you can implement ASTP, whether it's with RA training, or even if you use it as a programming option within your residence for monthly programming. There's also other evidence-based programming for residents. For example, again, Jessica mentioned the goal setting. You can even have just conversations with residents around their goals and how alcohol can impact the goals that they're setting for their personal and professional life. In your one-on-ones, if you're having one-on-ones with RAs, with residents, how can you have those conversations? If you're noticing if alcohol is impacting their work, if they're going out on Friday nights and they miss their on-calls for Saturday, how do you have conversations around that? For those of you that might have had motivational interviewing training, it's a great time to start bringing that out, just some MI work with them around their alcohol use. Or if you have really great connections with your health promotion office and they offer basics, doing a referral for basics so they can have that more professional one-on-one conversation. And then I know some of you folks in housing, you also conduct in-house conduct sanctions or a conduct hearing. So if that's part of your job responsibilities, how can you maneuver students into alcohol skills training program as a sanction or basics as a sanction? Or if you're a housing professional and your health promotion office wants people to help with basics facilitation, how can you be trained to facilitate these things and help them out? I will also say, just as a side note, just also from the prevention and programming perspective, there are some programs that RAs conduct that may not be the most effective when it comes to these strategies. A couple I think of from my time in housing, water pong, so the beer pong, but using water instead of beer, or also Mario Kart using fatal vision goggles or beer goggles. Just be conscientious of the question of, is this really educating our students, or is this reinforcing and giving them time to practice these behaviors that may be high risk for them? So these are the conversations and these are the things that CollegeAIM can help you navigate with your own programming, as well as your interactions with your residents and your hall staff. So with that, that's all of my slides. So we have about 12 minutes for any follow-up or Q&A.
Thanks, Alicia. I'll just put up our email addresses so that if anyone was like, wow, I want to follow up with about, A, B, or C, here's how to contact us. We did want to leave time for your questions and input. Kimberly wrote, Alicia, do you not recommend using fatal vision?
So I will start answering that question and will gladly let Jason and or Jessica fill in because they know the research better than I do. I think with fatal vision, you have to be very careful in using those goggles because for some students, it's kind of like what Jessica mentioned with the breathalyzers. Some students see it as a challenge of, oh man, like, can I walk a straight line wearing these goggles? So it kind of prepares them for those high levels of intoxication. I know a colleague of ours at another institution actually gave the example, which they were like, well, if you're going to do this, you could try it this way. Having a facilitator put the goggles on and let people see what intoxication looks like for those bystander intervention aspects of like, this is what a person with this BAC may potentially look like. So for students using them directly, I would say be cautious because you may be giving them practice for being intoxicated. But Jason, Jessica, I'll let you fill in there.
Well, I'll say a couple of things. CollegeAIM made very clear, we're not trying to squish. If it's not one of those things, if it's not in CollegeAIM, you can't do it. What they're saying is, if there's something that's not in CollegeAIM, then realize you're doing something that's not in CollegeAIM and evaluate it. Evaluate it for its effectiveness, evaluate it for any unintended impacts, evaluate it. So if you have something that's homegrown that you want to keep doing, again, evaluate it, add to the literature that's out there. In Washington State, I sit on our Washington Healthy Youth Coalition, and there have been folks that have brought up the limited research on goggles like this, mainly for kids younger than college students, because that's tended to historically be the target. You do it as people are turning 16, getting driver's licenses and things like that. The last time I heard a presentation on this, they said the two things that seem to happen when you do an approach like this is, one, people are laughing. It's fun and funny. And what is the unintended potential impact? Wow, being really drunk is pretty fun. Secondly, it never fails. There's at least one person who doesn't completely suck. And their takeaway is, wow, I'm a pretty good drunk driver. That is a bad unintended impact. So I personally would say absolutely follow the science. The science is not there with college students. If you have your heart set on, no, I know it works with our students, evaluate it, get it published, add to the literature. But always look at, is there an unintended impact? And the two I've heard of is the potential takeaway of, look how fun and funny being drunk is, and wow, I wasn't terrible at this. Jess, I don't know if there's anything you would add to that.
Yeah, I think that you said it, said it best. I mean, the only thing I would add is that even in the name, it's sort of an appeal to fear, right? Fatal vision. And that we know with this age group that there is perceived invulnerability, and that appeals to fear typically don't work well as a motivating factor. So I think focusing most on the unintended consequences is what needs to happen, but also consider sort of what is the motivational hook, if you will, that might help students have more buy-in to changing their behaviors. And it's typically not fear of consequences.
Great point. What else for folks that have questions, comments, anything? It's a small group, so you'll get very customized, tailored feedback. Another question came in, is there a certain program that you all stand by or love? Alicia, you're unmuted. Go ahead, Alicia.
Yeah. So from my personal experience as a facilitator, I really love basics when you're talking about individual one-on-one work with students, because they really appreciate that it doesn't come off as preachy or judgmental. You're really just talking to them about how alcohol's impacted them and their motivations behind it. And I would say almost all of the students I've worked with in basics over the years, they at some point say, this was not what I expected. And for them, it's a really good connector to campus resources. I'm newly trained in ASTP, so we'll be unleashing that at the University of Florida this fall, so stay tuned. But from what I know of that and from my experience with basics, I think ASTP is a really great evidence-based intervention for group work. I'll also say for quicker interventions or online interventions, e-checkup is really great. Students really resonate with that. I would also say if you all have subscriptions to Ohio State Screen U program as an expert, that's another interesting intervention that can be used for good follow-up conversations with students.
Jason, did you want to go next? I was thinking it might be helpful to actually talk about, given your direct experience, like integrating basics and ASTP into housing, since UW has been a model of that.
Yeah, I almost feel, I was like, are we allowed to answer this given our role in reviewing these? But given what you just said, I can only say as one exhibit A that the person who developed alcohol skills training program in basics that you just heard Alicia describe was Dr. Alan Marlatt, who was my advisor in grad school. Alan was the leader in college student drinking research up until he passed away 10 years ago. And what's amazing is, as he started getting the research, one of the first people he went to was the then Vice President for Student Affairs and the Director of Res Life, and said, hey, we've got this really great program. How can we get it to our residents? And so it was actually, there's been since 1989, which is now officially a lot of years, a relationship in place between Housing and Food Services at the University of Washington, the Department of Psychology at the University of Washington, to be able to have grad students in clinical psychology. Their funding is to be the alcohol and drug education coordinator and provide alcohol skills training program to first-time violators in Res Life. And for second-time violators, they get basics. Yet you don't have to get in trouble to get this content. So we also do work with residents, with RAs, to make sure they're aware of this content. They're aware of how to access, our team to be able to provide this to their residents, either at high-risk times of year, you name it. I'm doing a 4-hour training tomorrow with housing officers at my school in motivational interviewing and the alcohol skills training program content, not so they can deliver ASTP, but so that they know if students get referred to it, or if your RAs invite us to come in and present on it, this is the type of content they're going to get. So I do think that that complete integration with Res Life really highlights how we can make sure that science is informing what our students get. Someone wrote, have you heard of Red Watch Band? If yes, what are your thoughts on that program? Since I'm unmuted, I'll just say I'm a huge Lara Hunter fan. Lara at Stony Brook University is the national director of this. You will see in CollegeAIM that bystander programs are historically pretty hard to evaluate, largely because if everything's going right, your numbers are going to go in the wrong direction. And, right? I mean, if you think about it, I remember working with one school that their entire campaign was, how do you recognize signs of an alcohol poisoning? What do you do? And the next semester, they saw a 10-fold increase in hospital transports. The local paper said binge drinking increases 10 times at the local campus. Nope, that wasn't what was happening. It's that instead of walking by or doing whatever, more people were calling for help. So to truly evaluate bystander programs in as clean a way as possible, you have to track actual behavioral data alongside the transport data. And I see both Alicia and Jessica nodding. I mean, that's one of the things that gets challenging with that. But Stony Brook is the developers of and overseers of Red Watch Band. So I would say go to CollegeAIM, look at bystanders, and under resources, you can look at some of those options. And Alicia's saying that Sarah Smith at Marquette has done great work with implementing what Lara put in motion at Stony Brook. That's great.
Yeah, I would just jump in to add on Stony Brook's website, like the developers acknowledge because of the newness of the program, there are no specific formal evaluations of the Red Watch Band approach. And so what Jason advises about looking at bystander interventions in general. Because my understanding from CollegeAIM is there's sort of a collection of different bystander interventions in that category is a great place to start. And if you're thinking of doing it, I would just push again through the message of strongly encourage anyone to evaluate it if you're doing it on your campus. The more people that are evaluating it, the more likely it will have sufficient studies to make it into CollegeAIM the next time.
Mm-hmm. And I do know from the last time I heard Lara present, they have hot off the press data that they're working to get published so that they can add to the scientific literature. We are exactly, well, we have 10 seconds. So with that, I guess I will ask what final comments from Jess, Alicia, before we tag over to Beth. Beth is the person who organized these series. We'll tag back over to you to wrap it up.
Thank you so much. This has just been a fantastic webinar. We really appreciate our panelists. I really like the research and the practitioner-based approach. I think it answers a lot of questions that people have. And we want to thank you for this educational and interactive conversation. You'll be sent a short survey so that we can get some information from you about today's webinar. And this session was recorded. The link will be available tomorrow afternoon. Thank you again for joining us. Everyone take care and stay safe.